In the Caucasus Mountains along Russia's southern fringe, a hidden war is escalating. Moscow says it's battling militant Islam in the tiny Republic of Ingushetia. But people here say hundreds of innocent civilians are being disappeared, tortured and murdered.
He says we can no longer walk, our teeth have been broken, our jaws are broken, we desperately need some help.
They say they live in terror of a Russian security apparatus out of control. We arrived in Nazran, the largest town in the mainly Muslim Russian Republic of Ingushetia. We were taken to a house where we were met by a crowd of grieving women.
Больше я ничего не видела. Русские здесь 4-5 часов были здесь. Меня не пускали, сына не выпускали.
Hedy told us that just a few days earlier, at 5:30 in the morning, 400 heavily armed Russian soldiers had surrounded the house.
Все, что могли, сделали, через 5 часов они ушли.
The soldiers then grabbed her son and her and put them on the floor just here. And then what happened?
Сына тоже так вот взяли, поставили. За нами русские ходят, мы впереди.
She said the soldiers dragged her outside and kept her son Musa here on the floor. Hedy led us to the front room where she thinks the soldiers then took her son. Angry relatives tried to explain what they believe happened next.
One of the relatives is saying you can see here the outlines of a blood stain. They believe this is where he was tortured and killed.
Hedy told us that during the incident, armed Russian soldiers kept the family away from the house for 5 hours. Next, they showed me a small cellar.
Как один доску я сняла, другой русский вот здесь стоит, туда гранат бросает, меня сюда бросает.
They told us they thought troops put Musa's body in the cellar, then blew it up with a grenade. They pointed to what they believe is evidence.
They point to bits of flesh and blood that are on the side of the brick. And if you look up at the ceiling, you can see the signs where the grenade blast has gone in. The shrapnel has ripped into the ceiling and the door.
Rashid, a cousin of the dead man, had filmed his body. It had been torn apart.
Rashid is just showing me a truly awful scene, which is the remains of Musa's body after his body was brought back from the morgue and brought home for the burial.
Musa's father, Salombek, told us his son was 27 years old and was taking exams to be an architect. He'd just got married and had a 1-month-old baby.
Why is this happening? Why are the Russians doing this?
Им нужен Кавказ без кавказцев.
Hedy said they believe the Russians want the Caucasus without the Caucasians, the indigenous Muslim people of this region. Salombek claimed young men were specifically being targeted to wipe the Ingush out as a race.
Абсолютно невиновных людей уничтожают. Я считаю, это на уничтожение нации идет.
Это же прекратиться должно же.
Musa's sister Fatima said they filmed her brother's remains as evidence to show the world, not only for them, but for the many families who were losing young men. How many have they killed, she cried. It has to stop. Ingushetia is officially a self-governing part of the Russian Federation, but we could see Moscow's influence and its troops everywhere.
That was just a traffic police checkpoint, but we have to be very careful how we film here. We have to keep it very low key, because while we've got accreditation to work anywhere in Russia, the authorities don't really want foreign journalists down here.
Camera down.
For centuries, Ingushetia has been run by a system of clans. We'd been told that many of them had been targeted by Russian security forces. We've come to this big compound to meet one of the most powerful clans here in Ingushetia. Maksharib Alshev heads a clan of 20,000 Ingushetians. His home is surrounded by closed-circuit cameras and armed guards. They've got weapons in here that they're legally allowed to have for their own self-protection because he fears they could be attacked at any time.
Вот как бы под домашним арестом. Вот это самый младший внук, он родился после. И как все начиналось? Они утром рано в 6 часов, 2 БТРа врываются вот в этот двор.
Last year, Makshirib said several truckloads of heavily armed Russian troops stormed his compound.
They came in and smashed up the office, turned everything upside down, and were shooting around the compound.
Я получил информацию.
They were shooting at his wife, and they threw this little fellow to the side and fractured his arm.
Очень серьезную информацию, что готовятся меня убить.
Makshirib told us he believed the only reason he wasn't killed or captured was because he wasn't in the compound at the time of the attack. We moved away from the children to discuss the scale of the violence.
Специально был избран, из-за этого он и был избран. С 2002 года по 2004 год, за 2 года, было убито 457.
Makshirib told us this wave of killing started in 2002 when Moscow installed a pro-Russian president to rule Ingushetia. In that year alone, he said, 457 young men were killed, the vast majority of them innocent civilians, rounded up on suspicion of opposition to the Russian-installed president.
And as one of the biggest clans, the Alshevs were one of the biggest sufferers of this sort of policy.
He told us that because every family, clan and tribe had lost somebody, it had led to people taking up weapons against the Russian state.
Checkpoint, we better put the camera down right now.
With checkpoints on all the main intersections, we had to take back roads to move around. Rashid, the cousin of the dead man whose grieving family we had met earlier, asked to meet us at a graveyard just outside Nazran. Rashid revealed that his cousin wasn't the only family member to be killed recently.
У нас есть мы точно не знаем, есть информация, что они наткнулись на место проведения спецоперации.
Rashid told us his brother and 3 friends had been buried here just the week before. He claimed they'd been taken in by government security services because they'd unintentionally witnessed a security operation. Rashid told us he believed his brother and friends had been tortured, and to hide the signs of torture, security services had blown their bodies up in a car.
Подкинули им какой-то автомат.
Security officials said they were rebels, but Rashid denied this. He told us he couldn't fight Russia because it's too powerful. But he said many young men do want to take up arms against the state to seek revenge for acts like this. The allegations we were hearing were shocking. But we'd been warned that if we approached the Russians about them while here, our sources could be put in serious danger. Next day, we were stopped passing through a checkpoint and taken in for questioning.
At the police station, we were questioned by layers of security bureaucracy. It started with the local police, immigration officials, and then we were questioned by the FSB, the Russian Secret Service, as to why we were here.
The FSB, or Federal Security Service, is the successor of the infamous KGB. It's responsible for Russia's internal security and says it's leading operations against armed Islamist rebels here in Ingushetia. We were allowed to continue on our way for now. We got news that one of our contacts urgently wanted to meet us. She claimed she had information from inside the security services.
Вот, и он говорит, что им просто не дают возможность работать. Закрывают то их издание, то еще что-то.
We were told that following our detention, security officials had decided we were part of an anti-Russian conspiracy to investigate human rights violations in Ingushetia. We were to be considered enemies of the state, and if caught, prevented from working and our material confiscated.
come further out of Nazarene to meet this family that are in this apartment building here. You very much had the sense the whole place is being watched very closely, so we have to be quick.
Petimat Albakava showed us photographs of her 24-year-old son, Batir. She told us on July the 10th, just a few weeks before, police came here demanding to see everyone's passports. When her son Batir presented his, the police took him to Nazarene police headquarters.
She said, we didn't expect anything like this. We're just a normal family.
She said when her son failed to return home, she went to all the police stations trying to find Batir, but she could find no trace of him anywhere.
10 days later, they found out on the internet that a man with her son's name was killed in the forest.
She told us the authorities claimed Batir was killed in a clash with government forces when he was fighting as a rebel, that he was wearing camouflage and was found dead carrying a weapon.
When in fact she was here when he was dragged away by the police from this very home.
Petimat showed me Batir's licence to work as an aircraft engineer. She said he'd been security cleared for this job, not something given out to suspected Islamist militants.
And yet he's been killed, allegedly as a rebel. She said he had no time to go and train as a rebel, he was always doing his exams.
Petimat told us when she finally received Batir's body, it was covered with what appeared to be signs of torture.
His shoulder was all black, he had bruises all over his arms, his hand was broken. His legs were dark blue and black, all of which indicated to her signs of electricity being used for torture.
She saw 2 gunshot wounds, one to the heart. We wanted to verify Petimat's claims.
We're going to see one of Ingushetia's leading human rights workers, but it's believed that he's very closely watched, and so to try and keep our profile down and to try and lessen the danger to him, we're going to see him at night.
It was striking that despite the risks, people were desperate to get their stories out. Magomed Mutsolgov runs Ingushetia's main human rights group, Masha, which means peace in Ingush. Since 2002, the group has been documenting the arrests and torture of civilians in the Republic. I asked him about Petimat's case, and he called up the file. He told us this was the body of Petimat's son, Batir.
And as she said to us, you can see the signs of torture. His arm has virtually been cut off. It's unclear whether that happened before he was dead.
Magomed showed us the pictures of hundreds of people he claimed had been tortured and killed by security forces. Next, he showed us the photograph of a 6-year-old boy who he said was killed by government soldiers when they stormed his house. He said there were 14 children inside, and the pictures showed how it was raked with automatic gunfire. Magomed said troops then drove an armoured personnel carrier into the house to make it look like there'd been a gun battle. Magomed claimed that those reporting the violence have also been targeted. Last July, he said, his deputy was kidnapped by state security and tortured to reveal the source of reports of FSB death squads.
This man only spent 4 to 5 hours in the detention cell. His leg was broken and many of his internal organs were damaged.
Magomed told us he had found that in addition to the 1,000 people who had been murdered since 2002, 175 people had disappeared without trace.
Why is this happening? Why is the government disappearing people?
He told us people can be arrested on suspicion of being a rebel, being related to a rebel, or even just being seen with a suspected rebel.
В котором четко и ясно указано, что до 2002 года
He claimed rebel attacks only started here in 2002, after Russian forces became active in Ingushetia.
генерал ФСБ мой от Зязиков, вот эти вот похищенные и убитые, да, более 1000 человек, для такой маленькой республики, как Ингушетия, это большая трагедия.
He said the problem has been created by the Russian security forces and the secret services by killing people, and there's this chain of revenge now, which is leading to support, growing support for the rebels.
The Ingush rebels have killed around 200 Russian and Ingush police and soldiers over the past 7 years. Civilians have also been injured and killed in those attacks. Moscow has said the attacks are motivated by militant Islam. Unable to meet the rebels themselves, we went to Nazran's main mosque to ask what role religion plays in the uprising.
The imam here is very nervous about speaking to us. He says we could talk about religion, but we do not want to talk about politics at all.
Вы знаете, просто это тоже такая вот.
Imam Zakimoba explained that after years of repression during Soviet times, Ingushetians were still struggling to rediscover their religion.
Is it dangerous for people to come to the mosque?
Опять-таки, я вам как говорил, непонимание нашего народа.
He said it was dangerous for some to attend prayers because they could be treated with suspicion by the authorities. But this danger came from the state's misunderstanding of what he called a normal religious obligation.
We keep hearing about so many young men who disappear here. Why is that happening?
Честно сказать, я не могу ответить на этот вопрос.
He said he didn't want to answer that question because he didn't have the right information.
But when an outside force comes in and suppresses you, that's going to create anger.
And he said the relatives of the dead and missing could not openly express that anger, even though they were grieving. As we left, he told me it was a bad situation here, and the people just want freedom.
Freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom to continue their lives.
But he said everyone had to be very careful about how they discussed that.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
The troubled Caucasus region has been blighted by conflict for centuries. Ingushetia borders Chechnya, which, after 2 wars, is now largely under Russian control. Many of those who for years have reported on Russian human rights abuses in Chechnya have now turned their attention to Ingushetia. We're called to a meeting with local journalist Heda Saratova, who wanted to give us some important news. She told us a charity worker and close friend of hers had just been kidnapped in the nearby Chechen capital, Grozny.
As she was working with mothers and children on social issues.
She said the woman, Zarima Saduleva, had been helping families in both Chechnya and Ingushetia. She claimed that 1 hour before, she was seen being taken away from her home by men in uniform, and nobody knew where she was. Each day, more people came forward wanting to tell us their stories. Sultan Ozkakov showed us what he claimed was evidence of a recent attack on his family. He showed me a cupboard that had been retrieved from the photographic shop owned by his 2 sons. It was riddled with bullet holes.
There's about 8 or 9 shots into this piece of furniture. The Sultan's got another piece here. More bullet holes. So the whole place was sprayed with automatic weapon fire.
Это суббота была.
Sultan said that in January of this year, he was in his garden when he heard gunfire from the street outside. Witnesses later told him troops and police had stormed his son's shop.
They attacked with 2 APCs, armoured personnel carriers, 2 truckloads of troops and several jeeps for an area, he says, not much bigger than a quarter of the size of this room.
He said his sons, Murad, 29, and Ruslan, 26, were killed in that raid.
Недели 2 тому назад перед этим случаем.
Sultan told us that after the attack, the government claimed his sons were rebels.
He says, I believe they attack them because they need to show their bosses they're doing something and they go around killing innocent people.
Но официально никто не хочет сказать.
He told us the authorities had planted weapons on his sons and taken photographs of them.
Did they have any connection with the rebels or separatism?
Хорошо зарабатывают, не пьют.
Sultan told us what we had heard time and time again, that his sons had no connection to the rebels. He claimed that most of those being killed are hard-working, well-educated, religious young men.
К властям мы всегда были лояльны, всегда.
He believed this latest phase of killing is a continuation of a centuries-old Russian attempt to control the region.
Нас мало, маленький народ. Ваши сыновья неправильно работают, то, другое, третье.
Sultan told us that if he was to complain to the authorities, then he would be the next one found dead with a weapon planted on him and his picture sent to Moscow. Layla was married to Sultan's son Murad. They had 2 children. She told us 3-year-old Fatima was very close to her father, but was still too young to understand why he's no longer around. So they make up excuses.
He's still at work, or he's busy, or he's away, and when she gets desperate to see him in the evening, they make another excuse that he's at hospital or he'll be coming back soon. But this has been going on for months now.
Like many of Ingushetia's children, Fatima is likely to grow up with feelings of anger towards the Russian forces that her family believes killed her father. We contacted the FSB requesting a response to the allegations, but they didn't respond. Russia says strong military action is needed to maintain the integrity of its southern frontier. Moscow says its actions here support its war on Islamist terror, and if it didn't take these steps, Ingushetia could become a new home for global jihad. It had become increasingly difficult to move around Ingushetia. It was time to leave. We drove across the border into Chechnya and spent the night in the capital, Grozny. Next morning, as we prepared to fly home, we had an unexpected visitor. Heda, the Chechen journalist, was distraught.
What have you heard, Heda?
Просто расскажи быстро, что вчера в 2 часа дня в центре Грозного по улице Маяковского были задержаны.
She told us that her friend Zarima, the aid worker who'd been kidnapped, had been found murdered. Her body, along with that of her husband, had been dumped in a car boot on the outskirts of Grozny. No one had claimed responsibility.
Просто было бы за что ее убить, было бы за что. Этот человек совершенно не занимался ни политикой, ничем. Они просто занимались детьми.
Heda pleaded for help. We're human rights workers and independent journalists, she said, but we're making huge sacrifices for the work we do.
Это просто невыносимо.
Heda is saying, I don't know how to live here anymore. It's just this relentless cycle of violence here. It's absolutely shocking.
Well, next Friday at 7:35, Peter Oborne reports on a little-known conflict in the Philippines.